And this is Richard Wolff on debt in America. And I do have a couple of, actually, I don't think I have one chart. I do have data I want to show you in reference to the debt issue, because I do just want to say something. I think for the past year and a half, we've been talking about debt and income in reference to inflation, recent inflation, and also in reference to the pandemic, right? But the data that I'm going to show you actually shows some of this debt happened before the pandemic. So we're going to get into it. But the name of this video, Richard Wolff, it's called American Families Today Are Crisis Ridden. And he starts off talking about debt. So that's the part that we're going to focus on. And then he kind of shifts into the French Revolution. I think this is really important because he makes the connection about people being in debt and struggling financially, and then what people decided to do in France as a response.
Who suffered some weeks ago the decision by the Supreme Court in this country to block the plan he had developed for a modest partial relief of student debt. We have over 40 million, maybe closer now to 45 million Americans carrying student debt. They've been able to postpone repayment because of the crisis of 2020 and the pandemic. But the plan to give them some real relief was shot down, as I say, by the Supreme Court. And so Mr. Biden, with enormous fanfare of the sort our politicians seem to really like, made a big announcement very recently. And here's what it said. 804,000 students will get relief, and it will be worth $39 billion. Sounds big, right?
Now, hold on to that number, guys. I'm going to put this in the chat because I want you to remember this number. $39 billion. So I'm putting that in the chat, and hold on to that.
804,000, 39 billion. Well, I did the arithmetic just so you understand what Mr. Biden did and didn't do. 804,000, that works out to 1.8% of the student debtors in the United States.
That's the second one. 1.8% of student debtors. This will be important later on. I'll explain why. Just hold on to those numbers.
The other 98.2% get nothing from Mr. Biden in response to the Supreme Court. And the $39 billion, that's 2.2% of what those students owe. Starting now in a few weeks, those students, the vast majority of the 45 million, will start having to pay back between $300 and $400 a month. All
right, let me pause there. He's correct. Because my payments already restarted, and yes, I'm paying between $300 to $400 a month. He's correct about that. So let's just keep it real. But did you hear what he said? 98% of the student debtors didn't even benefit from that plan that Joe Biden had. And this is why a lot of us said, just cancel all of it. And then you don't means test it, of course. That makes things take longer. You have to have more paperwork, yada, yada. Don't do that. Just eliminated all of it, right? When he decided to means test it, there was an income limit. And I told you, even with the income limit, I said, that doesn't make any sense, because basically it's like, as long as you make, I think it was under $125,000 a year, right? Now, here's the problem with that. If you make, let's say, $126,000 a year, you are automatically disqualified from that $10,000 relief, or if you had the Pell Grants, that $20,000 relief of your student loans. Now, why is that a problem? Just because you're making $126,000 a year doesn't mean you don't have a lot of student debt. You see, $126,000 a year isn't much in New York City. It isn't much in San Francisco. It may be a lot in places like South Carolina. But let's say you're making that $126,000 a year. But let's say you have a lot of student debt. And the reason why you have a lot of student debt is because you went to law school. See, this is where a lot of us incur more of that student debt, not so much in undergrad, but more so in grad school, whether it's to get a master's degree or whether it's to get a Juris Doctorate to become a lawyer or PhD. Now, usually, depending on which school you go to, you can get some type of a fellowship for a PhD. So they're actually paying you a stipend and you don't have to pay for the program, but you still got to find a place to live and all that jazz. So let's say you have law school debt and you're making $126,000 a year and you did not qualify for that student debt relief. You are a part of that 98% that Professor Wolff is talking about. This is why we said don't means test it and just cancel it for everybody. Let's continue.
Which many of them do not have. Money which will eat into what they can do with rent or with food or with, you see the picture. It's an extraordinary thing to do. But I want to stress again, the hype of the media presenting this as some kind of important act. It's a horrible, bad joke on the problem of debt in this society. Not just student debt, but the debts everybody else has. Mortgage debt for your home, car payment debt for your automobile, and your credit card debt. These are all enormous overhangs of debt that have been taken on by people who don't earn enough money in their paycheck so that they wouldn't have to borrow.
Let's pause there because I want you to understand the root issue. The root issue is not the fact that people have the debt. The root issue is the fact that people don't make enough. They don't earn enough so that they don't have to borrow. Think about that. If you made enough money, if you had a living wage, if you had a higher salary, you would be able to do some of these things and not have to actually take out a student loan, put a bill on your credit card, have a payment plan for medical bills. Because some people that have debt in this country don't have student loan debt, don't have credit card debt, they have medical debt. So part of it is the living wage issue. But the other part of it is the fact that we don't have these free programs in this country like some other countries do. Now, the US government is funding Israel. They have free healthcare, but we don't. Everyone there has healthcare, but we don't. We don't have free public universities in this country. Now, at one point in time, the University of California school system used to be free. Did you know that? Used to be free. That's actually a good school system, public school. That includes UCal Berkeley is in that list too, by the way. So hold on to that. We're going to come back to you, Professor Wolff. We're going to come back because he's going to connect this to the French Revolution. But I want you to see something because this proves what I've been saying for a long time. Student loan default and delinquency statistics. Now, this was as of March 28th, 2023. Watch this. Let's just go straight to the data. Top student loan default and delinquency statistics. This is a big one right here. 7%. I wish I could make this larger. Oh, there we go. 7% of all borrowers are in default. That is around 3 million people. 3 million people. That means that 3 million people in this country cannot pay or did not pay their student loans. It doesn't take much for you to go into default, by the way. 3 million people in this country. So hold on to that. After entering repayment post-graduation, 11% of borrowers default within the first year, meaning over 1 million borrowers default each year. Now, when you graduate, you have a grace period. When I graduated from undergrad, it was I think it was 6 months grace period. It's supposed to give you enough time to find a job, start making some money, and then you'll be ready to pay your student loans. Here's the problem. That works out as long as you don't have a lot of debt for your student loans. And then number two, you're able to find a job that is going to pay you enough for you to pay your student loans. Some people ran into situations because the economy wasn't great where they weren't able to find employment that would pay them enough to pay off their student loans. Let's go on. Within 5 years of entering repayment, this number jumps to 25%. That means 25% of borrowers within the first 5 years go into default. 25%. At the end of 2022, borrowers had defaulted upon $124.4 billion by the end of 2022. Defaulted upon. Now, let's remember, we had a pause. We had the moratorium on the student loan payments. So like the student loan payments were frozen, started in 2020. It happened under Trump's administration. Started freezing the student loan payments under Trump administration during the pandemic in 2020. Joe Biden won in 2021. It continued. And then 2022 as well, it continued. And it was just this year, this month actually, that it went back into repayment. So if student loans were frozen during that time, which includes 2022, how is it that borrowers had defaulted upon $124.4 billion by the end of 2022? Because what I'm trying to show you is this, that people were already struggling with student loans. People were already struggling. This was before the pandemic. People were already backed up. This is what I want people to understand. This is why a lot of people say, well, you guys had a pause of the student loan payments for all those years. Yeah, but people were already in default. People were already behind. Listen to this. Borrowers are more likely to default on their student loans if they meet any of the following criteria. They attend for-profit colleges. Borrowers who attend for-profit schools are 67% more likely to default on their student loans than borrowers from a 4-year public college. An example, University of Phoenix. Do not go to University of Phoenix. So those for-profit colleges, they tend to give out more loans to students, sometimes more than they actually need. And the students will take it because a lot of times people going to schools like University of Phoenix, it might be a single mom, people who are typically a little bit older, right? So getting that extra money for them to attend school, that helps them out. Also, those colleges are more expensive. They'll charge you like $3,000, $4,000 for one class that a public university may only charge you like $1,500 for that class. So I've said this before, schools like the University of Phoenix are a scam. I've been trying to tell people not to attend those schools. Here's another one. They drop out of college. Students who do not graduate are 3 times more likely to default than those who do. Now, why do people have to drop out of college? I had a family member that had to drop out of college because they had to go back home and take care of their parents because their parents were sick. You still have the student debt. That doesn't go away because you have to drop out of school. That's another one. People coming from lower class communities, you know, it's just them in their family. And so the family looks out for each other. So if someone back home gets sick, you may have to drop out of school and take care of them. These things happen. What's another reason people may drop out of college? Finances. They can't afford it anymore. They have student loans, but it's not enough, and they can't pay for their books. They can't pay for the other expenses that go along with college. Or they develop an illness. And I've known people that had to drop out of college because they develop an illness, so they could not attend school. But like I said, regardless of the reason or what happens, the student loan debt does not disappear. And the last reason, they are BIPOC, but particularly Black borrowers. Black students are also 3 times more likely to default on student loans than white students. Now, why is that? The reasons that I just gave you. Who's more likely to drop out of college? Black students. Because of the other reasons I told you, financial reasons, or like I said, sometimes you got to go back home and help out someone in the family. These are things a lot of people don't, if you never had to deal with this, it's like when, for example, when I went to undergrad, I was the first person in my family to graduate from college, right? And that's my extended family too. So I was the first person to do that. What people don't understand is like, when I went to college, undergrad, like I didn't go to school by myself. Like everybody else back home was counting on me. But at the same time, it's like things that happen back home, you're not pulled away from. It's your family. So you still have to deal with those things. And so it's kind of like you taking everybody with you, even though they're not physically there with you. And that's what, it's one of those things, kind of hard to explain, but some of you in the chat might understand where I'm coming from. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's like, you're just like, I met people when I was in undergrad, like they just didn't really care. They're like, if I pass, it's no big deal. If I don't pass, no big deal, because I can just go back home and work with my dad's company. Like those are the kind of people I went to college with. I couldn't make that mistake. I think that's what people don't understand. Like I didn't have no company to go back and work with. So there's a lot more riding on you. And then the other reason, these for-profit universities like University of Phoenix, a lot of times have more African-American students that will attend those schools. So this is a big thing people need to start paying attention to. And I said before, instead of, high schools focusing on getting African-American students into college, there needs to be a follow-up to that. And that is making sure that African-American students graduate. That piece I felt was missing, because it's one thing to get your foot in the door, but it's another thing if you don't finish. So that's something that I wish would have been changed back then. In 2022, the student loan default rate was 2.3%. In 2012, this rate was 11.8%, but it has dropped hugely due to the student loan repayment pause. So keep this in mind, guys. The only reason it dropped to 2.3% is because the payments were on pause. 78% of students make at least one late payment within the first 5 years of entering repayment. Within 1 year of entering repayment, this number is 40.9%. Some borrowers go in and out of delinquency on multiple occasions. 6.4% of borrowers have done so 5 or more times. Those who have made late payments are often late on multiple payments. 44.7% of students who have made late payments have only done this on one occasion. 32.5% of students who have made late payments have made 2 or 3 late payments. And 15.6% of students who have made late payments have made 5 or more late payments. Now we're going to go back to Professor Wolff, because the reason why I wanted to dive into this, if this country does not get a handle on the student loan debt, the economy is going to fail. And I don't think the economy is going to be able to recover, because we have to realize something here. If these kids can't pay back their student loans, they're not going to be able to buy anything of value that's going to help the economy. For example, they're not going to be able to put a down payment on a home. Number one, they're going to check your credit. So if you defaulted on your student loans, that fucks up your credit. I'm just keeping it real. So that's going to affect the housing market. These kids aren't buying cars. We talked about this a couple days ago. So that's going to affect retail. So people ask me, what are they spending their money on? A lot of the younger kids are spending their money on experiences. When I was in undergrad and I graduated from undergrad, we spent our money on items, actual possessions that you could put in your hand or something. Kids today, they are spending their money more on experiences. And this is why I say Gen Z generation, they are more likely to be well-traveled. They would rather pool their money together as a group of friends and take a trip to another country, go backpacking through Europe. They would rather spend a little bit of money they have doing something like that than actually trying to get a brand new car. They're living in tiny shoebox apartments. We've talked about this before too. So what I'm saying, guys, if this country doesn't find a way to fix the student debt crisis, eventually this is going to affect the housing market even more, because who's going to be buying homes? All the boomers, the older peeps, they already got their homes. So who's going to continue to buy in the housing market other than BlackRock? Who's going to be buying these homes? Let's get back into the video, and he's going to relate this to the French Revolution. Listen to this.
I want to turn next to Bastille Day, July 14th every year, when the French nation celebrates its revolution. And to do that, it might be useful for me very briefly to go over what that revolution was all about. Back in 1789, right after the American Revolution, the French rose up. They had been suffering for a good century before that. And you know what they suffered? Something that ought to give us pause. They suffered the decline of the standard of living of the French people. Bad harvests, price increases, serious breakdown of their feudal economic system. And at the same time that the mass of the French people were suffering, they were able to watch the super rich, the 0.5% at the top. Louis the 14th, Louis the 50th, they like that numbers in the game. And those who had money could go to the home of the Louis on the outskirts of Paris, called the Chateau at Versailles, where they could see spectacular acres of carefully maintained gardens and walkways. Yeah, the super rich, the Elon Musks and Jeff Bezoses of that time. And at the end of a century, it exploded in a violent revolution that ended feudalism in France and brought in capitalism. That's right. The transition from pre-capitalism to capitalism was bloody and violent, as these kinds of things are, in large part because you squeezed the mass of people beyond what they could endure, while showing them that the vast wealth of the country was humoring a tiny group of people who had nothing better to do than to build the Chateau of Versailles. Okay.
So the point that he wants to make when he's connecting like the American debt to the French Revolution is that the French people, they got tired of this. They were tired of being exploited. They were tired of having, limited resources. So what did they decide to do? They rose up. The French Revolution wasn't a peaceful protest. I'm sorry. It was not a peaceful protest. It was violent. It was bloody, just like Richard Wolff just said. And what do you see happen with France today, with French people today? President Macron says, don't come out and protest. The French people say, whatever, Macron, we're hitting the streets. They do it anyway. They do it anyway. What I'm saying is that came from the French Revolution. And so the French people still have that. They still have that in their gut, that we know that there's more of us than there are of the police, and then there are of, President Macron. There's more of us, the people, the working class people. So I think what Professor Wolff is trying to say there, without necessarily actually saying it, is that when you think about the debt crisis that people have in this country, and yes, we do protest. People do protest in this country for other issues. It's usually social issues, though. I'm still waiting for the protest in this country over economic issues. I'm still waiting for people to hit the streets in this country and complain and chant, let's get rid of the billionaires. Now, Occupy Wall Street was an example where I felt like that was actually a good idea. I felt like it had the right message. But I think about the masses of people that we do have out in the streets for the Palestinian people, for their struggle. Imagine if we had that same level of people out in the street, that same level of energy in reference to inflation, medical debt, student loan debt, and overall cost of living in this country altogether. Imagine if we took Occupy Wall Street and we made it 10 times larger than what it was. Are we ready for that? Something to think about. Something to think about. Let me go to some of the comments in the chat. Thank you for the super chat, AP. Don't forget those trash Parent Plus loans, especially since the government got rid of the Perkins loans. Now parents are in debt with their kids. Yes, sir. This is true. I know those were ridiculous, a pain. Bill Bradley says no one's buying homes. Everyone will be renters. That was the goal. And you notice how they continue to make these shoebox apartments. Like every time you turn around, there's another condo building. They all look the same. They're tall, these little square boxes of, they think everyone wants to live in a box, basically. They stopped building single family homes, at least here in Massachusetts. They stopped building that and they started focusing on, let's just put everybody in a shoebox. Something to think about.